round of applause.
It works. Okay. So, thank you. I'm Leonardo. I work at the University of Trento, which is North Italy, close to Austria, actually. And I am also part of the Linux community from Florence, in the city where I actually live with my family. And this is a bit of an update of something that I presented 1 year ago. That was the netCommons project. We were starting more or less 1 year ago. Now we have almost 1.5 years of activity. And so I wanted to update you about what we do and what we hope that we will do in the next 1.5. I don't have a fancy video like the talk that we had before. And I didn't spend too much time in making slides because we have a lot of material on the website. So I will show you some of the material. I will show you things that I know better of the project. We are the coordinators of the project, and so I know everything, it works. But of course, for each single work package has its own results, and please take a look at it because the project is exactly focused on community networks. So this is a research project, again, 2016, 2018, 3 years. It's financed by the European Commission. We have 6 units in the project, 4 universities, 1 research center, 1 association from 6 different countries. And so we basically have in the project, these are the logos of people involved. This is the University of Trento. We are computer scientists. UPC, you probably know them already. It's the group of Leandro Navarro, that is the professor that started the Confine project. So he basically started all the research, the technical research on community networks. Then we have CNRS. CNRS is the largest research entity in France. And from there we have Mélanie Dulon de Rosnay, that she's a legal scholar. So she actually investigates law stuff, and particularly she's involved in peer production. Then we have NetHood, that is a not-for-profit association in Switzerland. Panagiotis Antoniadis is the one that is going to organize the meeting in Athens next week. And then we have another university from Athens, again computer scientists, and then we have another university from UK. And they actually are, they are sociologists. So they study political economy and political economy of communication. So the idea of netCommons is to have a group of different people that do research on community networks. Because as we all know, being practitioners, there is no community network without a community. There is no community without interaction. There is no community without some kind of governance. There is no alternative network if you don't know what you're alternative to, and if you do not know what is against sustainable things. So there is all this in the project. It's a lot, and we try to do our best to deliver the most that we can. Basically, the idea is that we do some blue sky research, trying to understand how community works and how we can feedback outside of the community network environment to the whole internet, some of the principles that community networks use. And then we try, of course, to help and sustain community networks with some kind of software that we develop or other documentation that we develop. So I started a 5 work package. We have 7 of them, but 5 are the ones that do research. We already have 12 deliverables on the website. Some of them, they are pretty important deliverables. Some other are more easy to read, and they touch all of the topics that I actually mentioned. And I will go through them and explain what we do, and also try to explain what we plan to do in the next year. So the first work package is led by UPC, and it deals with our community networks. What are the strategies that community networks use to govern themselves? What is the governance that they use? Governance, it's a word that it's generally not used in distributed environments. But here, for instance, the first question we asked is, what is a community network? We still do not have an answer, so we try to categorize initiatives that call themselves community networks and try to understand how are they organized, basically. What are the instruments that they use to take decisions, to communicate, and more or less this is the way that they actually let the community interact, let the people interact inside the community. And I have, no. I will just show you the deliverables so that you have an idea of what they are. D1.3 report. No. It is, but you need both hands to make it work. So, so this is the deliverable that we published 6 months ago, and in which we actually contacted and we got in contact with several community networks, and we tried to categorize the way that they work with like a framework that some researchers project they try to elaborate. Of course, this is not like a full list of community networks, and if you're not here because we did not have anybody to contact from your community, then feel free to contact us and we will try to expand. But as you can see, we have good contacts with Giphy, for instance, because UPC is from Barcelona, and so we have a lot of details about how Giphy works. We have some more details about Greek community networks, in particular AWMN and Sarantaporo. That there are some people from Sarantaporo that are involved in the project, so we use them to interact with them and understand what they do. We are also trying to develop something with the people in Sarantaporo. AWMN, we had one Greek partner, so they tried to interact with them. Then we have one French partner, so we interact with FFDN, which is not exactly a community network as we intended in other experiences, but still it's very interesting what they do. We are based in Italy, so we actually describe what is the way that Linux works. And then Jürgen Neumann is involved in the project, so he served as a gateway to describe how Freifunk works. And then also we have contact with the UK association that is called INCA, and they are trying to build the whole second level network that connects small communities. And here, if you're curious, you have a lot of details of how the community work and what's the way that they try to organize themselves. Again, I will not get into the details. I will just give you the URL that is netcommons.eu. And here you find all the documentations. And if you want to ask questions that are more specific, you can ask them now or later if I can answer. And here you have all the reports and all the things that we are going to do. Everything it's Creative Commons, so you can do whatever you want with it, more or less. So this is Work Package 1, and something that Work Package 1 is also trying to do is to understand what are, now we started with understanding what some communities, getting in touch with them, and now Work Package 1 is working on a report on specifically the governance instruments that communities try to use. This is still not public because we are still it. Work Package 1 partners are still working on it, so it will be out in a few weeks at most. And there is quite enough of work here also, for instance, on Giphy. Basically because Giphy, to our understanding, is the network in the community that spend most time in defining the governance instrument. They have a pretty well-defined set of rules, I would say, or practices that they actually are using to make the network grow. And so this is probably one of the topics that is most covered in this deliverable. I think I will be very quick. Work package 2 is about sustainable growth in community networks, and this is a very complex work package because it investigates sustainability in many aspects that deal with community networks. There is nothing like a unique concept of sustainability in general. There is nothing like a unique concept of sustainability in communications. So if you want to say that your network is sustainable, it's hard even to define the concept itself. This has been, some of the sociologists that work with us, they started to understand what are the traits of sustainability for communications, because sustainability is normally intended as environmental sustainability. And now lately it is actually being expanded to other fields, but still we don't have, at least sociologists tell us that we don't have nothing for communication networks. So a communication network that for instance, uses renewable power would be sustainable for some kind, but then it breaks your privacy, and is it socially sustainable? And this is very hard to define. So this is one of the things that it was done, or it is undergoing. And then something that deals with the incentives of people in participating into community networks. There is a deliverable on this, which is still now pretty general, but it is going to be more narrowed down. And then there is something about economical sustainability, and in particular, the community network can go along with local currencies. There is a study about the Sardex. Sardex is a local currency that they use in Sardinia. It's a region in Italy that had a lot of success. And with people on the project, we are trying to understand if this can be used in community networks. There were people in Gifi that were interested in trying to put this kind of activity into their own network. And then there is something that I did myself. This is an instrument, it's a research that they published, and it deals with the way that we as network practitioners and network community networkers, how we consider our network distributed or centralized, and so if it hides single points of failure or not. Because generally, when you have a network, you have a planned network somehow, then hierarchical structures are themselves fragile unless you don't plan them to be redundant. So when you know that your network is planned and is hierarchical, you do it in a way that it's redundant. And this is true for a network, but it is also true for like a governance structure. Like you have in a company, you have boards, you have presidents, and they are more or less controlling each other so that there is no single point of failure. And when you actually deal with a community network, in all the people that I talk to, they say community network grows spontaneously in a distributed way, which means that it's not planned most of the times, which means that you do not really know if this is hiding some hierarchy or not, if it is fragile or it is redundant and robust. We just assume that since we do not put a hierarchy by design, there is no hierarchy in itself. And this is something that actually doesn't happen in real life. If you actually look at the networks, I have looked at some of them, and you, then you see that they have, the structure, it's not actually as distributed as we think it is. I have been looking at the topologies of Funkfeuer in Vienna, in Graz, and the topology of Linux. That is the one that I actually investigated more because I'm more familiar with the network. And the point is that these are data from 2014. In Linux 2014, there was, the analysis here is topological on the topology map given by OLSR and the node server and so on and so forth. And From the node server, I can get the owners. So I can have an idea of who owns the nodes. So I can try to understand if the network is fragile, not only at the network point of view, but also at the social point of view. What happens if somebody leaves the network? And the situation in 2014 was this one. There was one person that was owning 25 nodes over the 100 that were active at the time. And he was actually a single point of failure. So the network itself was topologically unbalanced because there were nodes that were much more important than other nodes. And there was one person that was owning many nodes. So when this person leaves the network breaks down. And this actually happened. So in Rome, they had to face this. And then I started to understand if this reflects also in the mailing lists. So from the owners of the nodes, I started to understand what are the communications between people in the mailing list. And since you can draw a graph with the data you extract from the mailing list, so who talks to who, you can actually use some similar tools to define the robustness of the network graph and the robustness of the communication graph, and understand who are the key elements in the social network extracted from the mailing list. And the point is that in the social network, there was still one person that was very central. I will not explain what it is, you have to trust me, but basically that he was in between a lot of communication. The point is that this person was the same person that was only in the 25 nodes. So in the end, the network that we built and this is distributed, it's robust, it's not centralized, everybody has the same influence on the network. This was not true in practice. There was one person that was owning a lot of nodes, and not because he wanted to control the thing, it's just one person that was very active and was helping a lot of other people that didn't have technical skill, so he was building nodes for them, basically. And we come to the point that we realized this. I mean, I came to the point that I realized this with the numbers, and the guys in Rome, they came to the point that they realized this because this person left the network, actually. So this is something that I did, and then I did more things. I will not get through all the details here, but basically, I started to understand if these networks are similar to other networks in the literature, if they follow some kind of distribution that makes them similar to other spatial networks. They're called some networks that have that are in which each node has a physical position, like power network, like the network for power distribution, these kind of things, and try to understand if they are peculiar or if they are different. And I'm also producing the software to do all the analysis. So I would be really happy to do the same things in other networks if you want to help me with topologies, data sets, and so on and so forth. So this is something that I did for Work Package 2, and that's why I spent so much time on it, because I did it. So I know how it works. And let's go on with Work Package 3. This is another technical work package. We have actually two different activities here. The first one, it's about the creation of a methodology to build application from bottom up into the network. So basically, one thing that we all say when we talk about community networks is that they're really cool because we can put our own application into it, our own internal services. My experience is that these internal services are pretty poor most of the time. That the network that grow larger is not, they do not grow because they have internal services, but because they actually connect to the internet. So it's really hard to fill the network with things that are interesting and that are into the network and not outside of it. So one thing that one partner is doing is to, together with the Salantaporo community, that is a network in Greece that is pretty young, and it's in a remote area of Greece where they have no other kind of connection. They are trying to make a process that leads to the creation of applications that they are interested to. And we have a couple of partners that are doing this, and they're also like writing down the methodology for this participatory design and realization of application. And right now they are actually looking at, since it's a very rural area, a lot of farmers, and they are trying to understand if they can actually automate some of the things that they do. For instance, placing webcams in remote places where the farmers cannot go to check if all the sheep are still there, something like that. And they are developing, another partner is developing another application, web app, a phone app that can be used to do crowd organization of tasks in this area. And this is really interesting because we have no actual, we don't want to go there and say, you have to do like this because it would be idiotic. We try to understand what are their needs and we try to help them achieve something that they will actually use after the end of the project. Then in Work Package 3, we also have other applications. These are things, a couple of things that we have been doing before the beginning of the project. There is one distribution that is called Cloudy. Do anybody of you know what Cloudy is? Good. Cloudy, it's a distribution that you can place on any embedded whatever, Raspberry Pi, or we use other hardware. And it is basically a repository for services. It's Dockerized, so you can actually download Docker images and run the containers with some services that are ready to use. So the idea is that you place some set-top box in your house, and this comes already with some file sharing, some video sharing, some blog and monitoring instrument for the network. And we are, the people from UPC are actually developing this. And we from Trento, we are developing another application that is PeerStreamer. PeerStreamer is an it's all open source, of course. It's an open source peer-to-peer video streaming application for live video. And we, in the lab where I work, before I came there, this was one of the activities that they had for the internet, basically. And now it is actually, we are putting it into Cloudy, so that the idea is that you can, whenever you have this device, you can anywhere in a community network, you pop up a video streaming, for instance with a webcam, and then everybody else who has the device in the network, it gets notified that there is this stream, and it can receive the stream, and it's all distributed without any server anywhere else. So this is what we are doing in Work Package 3, again a technical work package. Something completely different is what Work Package 4 does. Here, there are mainly legal scholars, so professors and researchers in the legal area, and they are trying to understand what are the legal frame that community network operate into. And this is really interesting in Europe specifically, because well, the European law of communication, it's implemented more or less in the same way in all the European countries. So everything comes from the European directive. And the European directive treats those that give connectivity as commercial ISPs. So it does not imagine that there is something different, a commercial ISP, that can give you connectivity somehow. And this is bad and good, meaning that if you are an ISP, you have some duties, some rights. For instance, you are not responsible for traffic that is generated by your clients. If some of your clients, they do something illegal, the ISP is not responsible for it. Doesn't have to check for this to happen. And the point is, when we have a community network, who's responsible for that? Community network is not an ISP most of the time. So law doesn't apply. So they're not actually, there must be somebody that is responsible for what happens. And who is it? Is it the person that shares his own internet connection? Yes, in the case that the illegal action is done through the internet. But if something happens inside the community, who's responsible? And since there are no strict rules, there are nothing that can really apply. Is it possible that somebody that is on the path from the guy that is doing something wrong to the gateway, he's on the path, he's doing nothing, but he's not covered actually by the protection that the law gives. So is he possibly responsible? And yes, the answer probably is yes, but We are still trying to understand this. And we are trying also to put some pressure on the lawmakers to understand that there is this kind of entity, a community network that they don't know anything about. So something that you probably have seen because it was also in, it passed also in the BattleMesh mailing list is this. Is this open letter that we actually prepared. We are working a lot with other advocacy groups, such as La Quadrature du Net, that is a French advocacy group that they are really good in doing advocacy. And basically, we drafted this, we made it circulate as much as we could, and it's an open letter to European legislators, because right now we have several things happening. There is going to be the new telecom package that is discussed now and will be finalized this year, and it will probably change everything. And the idea is that we are trying to let them understand that there is something different than big ISPs. That is what they have in mind when they do laws. So for instance, lifting unnecessary regulatory and financial burdens, want to be legally recognized as somebody that does network, you have to be an ISP, which costs money, and it is something that most of us do not want to do. Third-party liability is what I was trying to explain before, but it's, of course, it's much well explained here. Expanding the spectrum commons, so trying to have more free bandwidth. And then other things that you can actually, protecting free software, for instance, trying to intervene on the regulation of the devices, and so on and so forth. This was signed by a lot of networks and a lot of other associations, and it was sent to the Commission and to the Parliament, and we will follow up with this together with La Quadrature. We will organize something in Brussels in autumn, so that we will try to do some advocacy with it. Does this work better? Thank you. So this is something that, again, we try to do mostly with our legal researchers. Then, finally, Work Package 5. This is different. It is less connected, related to everyday life of community networks. Here, we are trying to understand how we can actually extract some of the wisdom that is it's inside community network and move it outside of community networks. So, for instance, the concept of sustainability comes back here. Can we define sustainability concepts that we can actually try to apply even to other experiences? And then we are now trying to understand, there is a questionnaire that has just been published to try to understand what is the different perception of the internet and the use of the internet from people into community networks, people outside community networks, and try to understand if we can actually bring some of those values out of community network and bring it to the wider society. This is more research work package, and we are trying to collect data now, and we are designing the questionnaire, the other things. There is, I mean, in science now, this interest into alternative internets, whatever it means, and community network, they are some kind of alternative internets together with instruments like Tor or these kind of things that allow to build somehow alternative conception of the usual internet. And that's more or less all I had to say. So I was very quick because I don't want to bore you too much with our research stuff. You have everything in the website. There's even too much things in the website, but we are always open to understand more about what communities do and gather more information. Personally, I am very interested in understanding topologies, how networks grow, and if this somehow relates to how technically sustainable the network is, especially for networks that are not planned. So I'm always open to finding new source of data from all your networks. And that's it for me.
Are there any questions? We have plenty of time.
I'm not since the beginning, so I don't know if I see you analyzed Linux community. My question is if you analyzed other communities?
I did not analyze other communities. I analyzed other networks, like the Austrian one in Graz and Vienna. I am trying to make my mind about other networks. For instance, we started to analyze the Freifunk APIs. There is this, in GitHub, there is like a JSON that describes all the various pieces of Freifunk. And from there, you can actually access also the network topology. But they use different instruments, so we're not really sure if we're doing things right. So I may talk to somebody of you or Freifunk to understand if we're doing things correctly. I am now trying to face the CNML, the database of Giphy. I was talking to Manos when I was in Barcelona a couple of weeks ago, because I need some help to understand what's in there, or what are the information that are correct, what are the information, because this is another thing. There are a lot of maps, but you never understand what's really in the map. Every community uses their own standard, and sometimes the information is updated, sometimes it's not updated, sometimes it's replicated in a different way in two different places. So most of the work is trying to make some sense out of it. And I think CNML also needs a lot of work. It's not just you get it, you parse it with network X, and you say, oh, this node is very central.
But the sustain.
Next question, maybe? Is there any?
Well, no, it doesn't. It does. I do have more kind of a comment, but if you want to say something that's related to Pedro's question, then maybe you go first.
Well, my comment was just to assure you that CNML data contains a lot of outdated nodes that maybe doesn't exist anymore, or maybe changed their status because the Giphy map is manually updated. So most of the time, if someone add the nodes, but then if someone leave the network, that person is not interested to remove the nodes from the map.
So there is no automatic update from some...
No, the Giphy, all the map, no, there is a lot of nodes that are not real. Thank you.
I just had a quick comment about what you were saying, that not imposing a hierarchy in the community structure doesn't mean that there is no hierarchy in practice. There is this paper by Joe Freeman, I think is called the author. You look confused, so maybe you don't know it. Yeah, she's she's analyzing, I think, activist groups during the second feminist movement in the 70s, and basically the argument of the paper is that like hierarchies always exists within groups, and either they're formalized and there is some kind of a process or procedure to put people in these places, or they're informal, in which case it is even more difficult to get hold of them or to maybe replace them if the dynamic is not going in a direction that the group wants. It's quite an interesting paper, I think. So maybe I'm writing an email.
Yeah, of
because I
course.
think it's, yeah.
I struggle to understand these kind of things which are not my subject, so I try to find links from one science to another. And this is, for instance, there is a very famous researcher that is called Barabaji, and he actually found that in many different networks, networks that go from communication networks to biological networks, there is a structure that is more or less always the same. And the structure is that there are a few nodes that are extremely important and a huge amount of other nodes that are completely irrelevant. Now, his work has been disputed, so it's not exactly to be taken for granted, but the point is that many networks, if you just leave them grow as they grow, they build some kind of intrinsic hierarchy. And in social science, also there are other, there is one famous paper from the beginning of the 20th century from Michels, I think he's German or Austrian. But he coined the term the iron law, which means that every movement, and he was actually dealing with social movement, political movement, that starts as horizontal movement where we try to make things in a way that we listen to each other and so on, and we try to defend our rights, it ends up in an oligarchy. That was his conclusion. Now, I think he also became a fascist after that, but so he probably he had some ideas about political parties that were not exactly late. But the point is, if you just leave things go and you don't care of it, you will build a hierarchy and an oligarchy somehow. So whether you put it, you actually define it, so you actually say what are the roles of the people, or those roles will actually come out anyway. And you have to deal with this. Do not hide behind the fact that we are a distributed community, while instead this is not going to be true.
More questions? If I wait long enough.
I'm curious. You just said one of the networks currently facing the situation that one of the main players left the network. You already know what is happening now. I mean, I wonder if an important person leaves, and you anticipate like it collapse. Maybe it does not. Maybe the gap is just filled with other activists or with people that are waiting for the chance to come out and have their outcome.
I actually analyze, not as thoroughly as I did 2 years ago, Linux in Rome, and the number of physical installation decreased a lot. So I could count 140 in 2014, physical places with 1 or 2 nodes, actually. And last time I checked, there were less than 100. Now, the community started to react to this somehow. But the point is that there are some nodes that are abandoned, and the guy has the key, and he knows the person that lives there. So it's hard for somebody else to go and ring the bell and say, hey, you have a node and it's not working properly, let me fix it for you. And this is not exactly what the community feels like doing. I mean, from one day to the other, they realized that, or probably they already realized it, but at some point it became evident that the model that they were growing was not exactly sustainable for them. That's why I underline sustainability, because this is some kind of technical measure that you can have on the sustainability of the network, and you can extract it from data. So one thing that we want to do now is to use NetJSON graph. It's a JavaScript library that Federico Capuano from Linux he developed, and we want to actually put the information about the technical robustness of the network in the network graph, so that you can actually, for instance, visualize which are the nodes that if you remove them, everything falls apart, which are, you can relate them to the owners, so you can color them, or so that at a glance, you can actually understand if the network is going in the direction that you yourself consider sustainable or not. So that at least if this happens again, it is visible. And the same thing would be nice to do with data from social networks, mailing lists, which is really hard for me because there is a language barrier. In Linux, I can actually see the mailing list content and understand if I'm doing things right or wrong. But in German, this would not be possible for me.
So, anybody else? Ah.
I have maybe two questions. One is there any way to give feedback to your reports? So maybe you can make corrections or additions. I don't know. I read the part about Freifunk and I don't know. I would have multiple additions or remarks about part of Freifunk. And then the other question is, how do you get in contact with the community networks? Or how do you decide like who to use as source? Or I mean, yeah, what's your approach to contacting the community networks and maybe also validating the data you get from people?
Yes, we can. I mean, if you want to add modifier or something, this, I mean, contractually you have a deliverable. When it's done, it's done. But we can actually update it. So even if it was delivered as is, but we are actually interested in correcting, adding, whatever. So go on the website, find the contact email, and email us. And the second question was, we all are more or less involved in community networks. So mostly we focused on communities that are in the countries where we live. So we don't have the language barrier, and we can talk to them. Freifunk is, we have no Germans. We have, in the advisory board of the project, we have Jürgen Neumann, and he is the one that, I said, worked as a gateway, mostly. And then we check the documentation. We talk to the people that we have contacts with. So this was more or less the thing that we did. In some other cases, for instance, in France, there were researchers that they lived with the community for a while, going to the meetings, and we did the same with Giphy. There are Giphy people in UPC, in the University of Barcelona, so we have a lot of contacts with them. And the Greek guys also, we have people. So there is not like a strategy for approach. It's more the connections that we already have, and we try to make them stronger. It's not an easy work. Like we cannot just send an email. We send the emails, but we cannot send an email to somebody that is not involved in the project and ask them, hey, do you have like 1 week of work that you can dedicate for us so that we understand what you need and what you do? It's not possible to do it like that. So we do it step by step with the people that we are more involved with already.
Oh, as I don't see any further questions. Oh, there's still another one. Yay!
And so finally, we are talking always as technical network topology. I want to know if during this project you worked more about the sustainability of the communities, more in terms of in the social terms, because, for example, we have these kind of problems inside of Giphy, and we admire other communities, but I hear that the other communities have the same problems, for example, with newcomers. It's difficult to obtain this data. Could be interesting to have guidelines about this, how to handle with these people. I don't know if you can provide you more information.
There is something that in the deliverable that I showed you that is not public yet about governance. There is some research. I still did not study it like thoroughly, but there is a part of research that it deals with what are the instruments that you use to take decisions inside your network, which is one of the main things in community network that is hard to do and influences a lot of other things. And from there, you can actually make decisions on how to involve new people. You can make decisions, technical or strategical decisions on the network. Are we going to use ubiquity or whatever else? Are we going to stick with open source or whatever else? These are things that normally fragment the communities. And if you do not have a procedure to manage these processes, then there is a chance that you fail, or that you marginalize some people, that you lose them, basically. So this is something that we are going to actually do, proposing guidelines from the experience of the networks that we know and that we talk to. And then there are also other work package on the, I was mentioning the participatory design of applications. So how you should gather together with people that are outside of this room and they live just in front of here, to understand if they would be interested in participating. What can you do to, what is the process that you can use to make them really participating, and not just convince them to say, okay, you can put a node on my roof, and that's it. So these are things that we are actually involved in the project.
You are going to work on this, and would be interesting to have the comparison, more than analysis of a particular community, to have the comparison of what is the common sense to bring these newcomers or to retire old people that is like born out, so it's like interfering with the community, no? You know?
Yeah, I don't know if there is something specific on this topic, but the deliverable 1.3 is comparing. It starts from real situations. What are the instruments that they use? 3.1.
Okay.
It's still not public. It will be in a few weeks. You can ask it to Leandro.
Good. And there we will sadly run. We have.
Thank you for listening.